Ladies and gentlemen, life is suffering. That's an undeniable truth. And right now, some of you are carrying burdens so heavy that they threaten to crush you. You feel lost, overwhelmed, like you're standing at the edge of an abyss, staring into the darkness. But let me tell you something. You must get through this. When it strikes, when you're beaten down by failure, heartbreak, or despair, you have two choices. Collapse under the weight of it, or stand up, straighten your back, and push forward despite it. And that's what life demands of you. It demands courage. It demands responsibility. It demands that you carry your suffering with dignity, not because it's easy, but because the alternative is far worse. So if you're struggling, if you're in pain, know this. There is a path forward. It's difficult, no doubt. But if you take one step and then another and refuse to be broken, you will emerge stronger, wiser, and more capable than you ever thought possible. You must get through this because the world needs the best version of you. Life is hard. That is the first thing you must come to terms with. It is not a mistake, it is not an anomaly, and it is certainly not an unfair glitch in the system. It is the very nature of existence. To be alive is to suffer, and that is reality that no one escapes. People often spend their lives attempting to avoid suffering, hoping that if they just arrange things correctly, if they just make the right decisions, if they just get lucky, if they just do everything perfectly, then maybe they can sidestep the inevitable. But that is an illusion. Sooner or later, life will throw something at you that is beyond your control. And if you have not accepted suffering as a fundamental truth, you will crumble under its weight. The first step in overcoming hardship is to acknowledge it without resentment or self-pity. If you resist the reality of suffering, if you fight against it in a way that is rooted in denial, then all you do is create additional suffering for yourself. People who refuse to acknowledge pain as a natural part of life often become bitter, frustrated, and aimless. They look at their struggles as some kind of personal curse rather than an unavoidable aspect of being human. This mindset makes them weak because instead of preparing themselves to endure, they expend all their energy trying to convince themselves that they shouldn't have to. But this is a dangerous delusion. When you accept suffering, you become stronger. You begin to see that struggle is not an aberration. It is built into the structure of reality itself. And that realization shifts your perspective. Instead of seeing pain as something that is unfairly inflicted upon you, you begin to see it as something that is simply part of the fabric of existence. This does not mean that suffering is good in itself, nor does it mean you should seek it out unnecessarily. But it does mean that when hardship arrives, you do not fall apart. You do not waste time asking, I, me. You do not wallow in the belief that you have been uniquely cursed. Instead, you acknowledge it for what it is, the price of being alive. The question is not whether you will suffer. The question is what you will do about it. Many people avoid this question by distracting themselves. They numb their pain with entertainment, addiction, or endless distractions. They avoid looking at the difficulties in their life head on because doing so is uncomfortable, but avoiding suffering does not make it disappear. It only makes it fester. When you refuse to confront your suffering, it grows in the shadows. It manifests in ways that you don't expect. Anxiety, depression, resentment, and a deep sense of unfulfillment. You can lie to yourself for a while, but deep down, you will always know that you are running. The only way forward is through. You must face the suffering in your life with open eyes. That means acknowledging your failures, your limitations, and your fears. It means recognizing the areas where you are struggling instead of pretending everything is fine. This is not an easy process. It requires honesty, and honesty is painful. It requires you to look at the parts of yourself that you would rather ignore. It demands that you let go of false comfort and face reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. But the alternative is far worse. If you refuse to acknowledge suffering, it will control you from the shadows. It will shape your actions, your emotions, and your thoughts in ways you do not understand. When you accept suffering as a part of life, you gain clarity. You stop wasting energy on self-pity. You stop resenting the fact that life is difficult. Instead, you begin to ask a different question. How can I endure this? How can I grow from it? How can I move forward despite it? These are the questions that lead to strength. They are the questions that separate those who crumble under adversity from those who rise above it. But none of this is possible until you first acknowledge the suffering itself. Taking responsibility is one of the most difficult but necessary steps toward overcoming hardship. Many people go through life blaming external circumstances for their struggles. They blame their upbringing, their environment, the people around them, or sheer bad luck for the things that have gone wrong. And to some degree, they may be right. Life is not fair. Some people are born into worse situations than others. Some people face obstacles that others do not. Some suffer injustices, betrayals, and tragedies that they did nothing to deserve. But none of that changes the fundamental truth that no matter what happens to you, you are still responsible for what you do about it. The moment you hand over responsibility for your life to external forces, you also hand over your ability to change anything. You become a passive observer, waiting for the world to fix itself, waiting for things to magically improve, waiting for the people around you to treat you better, waiting for some stroke of luck to make things easier. But waiting is not a strategy, and blaming is not a solution. There is a dangerous comfort in blaming others. It allows you to avoid the painful reality that change is in your hands. If you convince yourself that your problems are entirely the fault of someone else, then you can avoid the burden of doing anything about them. But that is a trap. Because the moment you stop taking responsibility, you also stop growing. You make yourself powerless, and that is a terrible place to be. Powerlessness leads to resentment. It leads to frustration. It leads to a sense of despair because deep down, you know that as long as you refuse to take responsibility, your situation will not improve. Taking responsibility does not mean blaming yourself for everything that has ever gone wrong. It does not mean pretending that bad things have not happened to you or that you have not been treated unfairly. What it means is accepting that regardless of what has happened, it is up to you to decide what happens next. You cannot change the past, but you can decide how you respond to it. You can either let it define you as a victim, or you can use it as fuel to move forward. That choice is always in your hands. When you take responsibility, you take back control. You stop waiting for things to change on their own, and you start doing something about them. If you are unhappy with your life, you stop making excuses and start taking action. If you are stuck in a bad situation, you look for ways to get out of it instead of blaming the circumstances that put you there. No. If you are struggling with something, you ask yourself what you can do to improve instead of waiting for someone else to fix it for you. This is not an easy process. It requires looking at yourself honestly and admitting the ways in which you might have contributed to your struggles. It requires letting go of the comfort of excuses. It requires stepping into discomfort and accepting that improvement often comes with pain. People who refuse to take responsibility often fall into patterns of self-pity. They tell themselves stories about why they cannot succeed, why they cannot be happy, why things will never change. And those stories become self-fulfilling. If you tell yourself that you are powerless for long enough, you will start to believe it. And when you believe it, you act as if it is true. You do not take risks. You do not put in effort. You do not push yourself beyond your comfort zone because you have convinced yourself that it would not make a difference. And so you remain stuck. Taking responsibility is the first step toward breaking out of that cycle. It is the moment you decide that your future is in your hands, no matter how difficult your past has been. It is the moment you stop making excuses and start looking for solutions. It is the moment you recognize that while life is unfair, you still have the ability to shape your own destiny. And that is the most powerful realization a person can have. When you are faced with a massive challenge, it is easy to feel overwhelmed. The weight of it presses down on you, making it seem impossible to move forward. The problem appears so large, so complex, that you do not even know where to begin. This paralysis is dangerous because when something feels impossible, the natural reaction is to do nothing at all. You stand still, frozen by the sheer enormity of what lies ahead, convincing yourself that you are stuck. But this feeling, as real as it seems, is often an illusion. The truth is, no problem is too big to tackle if you break it down into smaller, manageable steps. One of the biggest mistakes people make when facing difficulty is that they try to solve everything all at once. They want a complete and immediate solution to their problems, and when they cannot see one, they become discouraged. They look at the long road ahead and convince themselves that it is too far, too difficult, too exhausting. But that is not how progress works. No one builds a successful career, overcomes personal struggles, or achieves anything significant in an instant. It is always the result of small, deliberate actions taken consistently over time. The key is to stop focusing on the entire journey and start focusing on the next step. This approach applies to every area of life. If your goal is to improve your health, thinking about all the work required, changing your diet, exercising, improving your sleep, can feel overwhelming. But if you break it down into a single action, like drinking more water today or going for a short walk, suddenly it seems manageable. If you are struggling with a personal crisis, the idea of completely fixing everything at once is daunting. But you can always take one small step, whether it is reaching out to a friend, journaling your thoughts, or making a plan for the next day. If you are working toward a big ambition, the gap between where you are now and where you want to be may feel impossible to bridge. But if you focus on learning one new skill, completing one task, or making one connection today, progress begins. People often overestimate what they can accomplish in a short time, but underestimate what they can achieve over a long period with consistent effort. A small step may not feel like much in the moment, but when repeated, it compounds. A person who writes 200 words a day may not seem like they are making significant progress, but in a year, they will have written a book. Someone who saves a small amount of money each month may not feel like they are building wealth, but over time those savings grow. The same applies to personal growth, mental health, and overcoming hardships. Small steps accumulate, and before you realize it, you have come much further than you ever expected. Breaking problems down is not just about making progress. It is also about maintaining mental strength. When a challenge feels too large, it drains motivation. The human mind is wired to seek out achievable goals. When something appears impossible, the brain resists even trying. This is why large problems must be divided into smaller ones. Completing even a minor task creates a sense of accomplishment, and that feeling fuels momentum. You start to believe that progress is possible, which keeps you moving forward. Another reason breaking things down is essential is that it allows for adaptability. When people try to tackle problems all at once, they often become fixated on a single solution. If that solution does not work, they feel stuck. But when you take things step by step, you allow yourself the flexibility to adjust. If one approach does not work, you can pivot without feeling like you have failed. You are not locked into an all or nothing mindset. And instead, you are constantly making small improvements, learning from each step, and refining your approach along the way. The most important thing is to start. When you take even the smallest step forward, you shift your mindset from inaction to action to action. That shift is powerful. It means that no matter how difficult your situation is, no matter how overwhelming your problems may seem, you are not stuck. You are moving, and movement, no matter how slow, is always better than standing still. Struggle is an unavoidable part of life. No one escapes it, and no one is exempt from the challenges that come with existence. Pain, loss, failure, and hardship are not rare occurrences. They are the norm. The mistake many people make is believing that struggle is simply an obstacle, something to get rid of as quickly as possible, something to avoid at all costs. But avoidance does not eliminate struggle. It only delays it, weakens you, and leaves you unprepared for the next challenge. A more powerful and productive approach is to find meaning in the struggle itself. Instead of seeing difficulty as something purely negative, you can begin to view it as an opportunity for growth, transformation, and deeper understanding. People who endure great hardships and come out stronger on the other side are those who have learned to extract meaning from their suffering. They do not simply go through difficulties, they grow through them. They refuse to be victims of circumstance, instead choosing to use their pain as fuel for something greater. This is not an easy process. It requires a shift in perspective. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? I ask, what can I learn from this? Instead of focusing on how unfair or painful something is, they focus on how they can use the experience to become wiser, stronger, and more resilient. Struggle forces people to confront parts of themselves they might otherwise ignore. When everything is easy, there is no need to examine weaknesses, no need to challenge assumptions, no need to push beyond comfort. But hardship strips away illusions. It reveals who you really are. It shows you what you are capable of enduring, where your limits truly lie, and where you need to grow. It tests your patience, your courage, and your determination. Without struggle, these qualities remain untested and undeveloped. People who have never faced real hardship often lack depth. They have not been forced to confront their fears, adapt to failure, or rebuild themselves after falling apart. But those who have struggled and chosen to face it with purpose develop a level of wisdom and strength that cannot be gained in any other way. Meaning does not come automatically. Struggle itself does not guarantee growth. Many people go through painful experiences and emerge bitter, resentful, and broken. The difference between those who grow from struggle and those who are crushed by it is their ability to extract meaning from it. This is a conscious choice. It means refusing to see yourself as a helpless victim and instead choosing to see yourself as someone who is being shaped by adversity. It means recognizing that pain is not just something to be endured, but something that can be transformed into insight, discipline, and strength. Many of the most extraordinary people in history were shaped by great struggles. Those who achieve great things often do so because they have suffered greatly. They did not allow hardship to define them as weak or defeated. Instead, they used their pain to push them forward. They took their suffering and turned it into art, into knowledge, into movements that changed the world. The greatest stories are not about people who had an easy path. They are about those who endured, adapted, and rose above their suffering. They are about individuals who found purpose in their pain and used it to create something meaningful. When faced with struggle, the first instinct is often to run from it, to resist it, to complain about it. But what if instead you leaned into it? What if instead of seeing hardship as something unfair, you saw it as something necessary, something that is shaping you into a stronger, more capable person? What if instead of asking how to escape suffering, you asked how to grow from it? The answers to these questions determine whether struggle becomes a source of transformation or merely a source of misery. Pain can destroy, but it can also build. Struggle can break you, but it can also shape you. The difference lies in whether or not you choose to find meaning in it. When you shift your mindset from resistance to acceptance, from avoidance to adaptation, you begin to see challenges differently. They are no longer just obstacles. They are opportunities. They are lessons in disguise. They are the fire that forges character, the resistance that builds strength, the storm that forces deep roots to grow. The people you surround yourself with have a profound impact on your mindset, your actions, and your ability to overcome challenges. Human beings are deeply influenced by the environment they place themselves in, often in ways they do not immediately recognize. When you are surrounded by negativity, complacency, and weakness, it becomes incredibly difficult to rise above your struggles. But when you place yourself among people who are strong, driven, and supportive, you gain access to a source of strength greater than your own. The company you keep can either lift you up or drag you down, and that choice is one of the most significant factors in determining how you navigate hardship. Many people underestimate just how much their environment influences them. They assume that their thoughts, behaviors, and attitudes are entirely self-determined, but this is rarely the case. The way you see the world is shaped by the conversations you have, the attitudes you were exposed to, and the expectations set by those around you. If you spend your time with people who complain, make excuses, and refuse to take responsibility for their lives, it becomes incredibly easy to fall into the same mindset. If the people around you constantly reinforce weakness, telling you that life is unfair and that you are powerless to change your circumstances, you may start to believe them. Even if you have the internal drive to improve, being surrounded by negativity can drain your energy and make you second-guess yourself. On the other hand, when you surround yourself with strong, ambitious, and disciplined people, you absorb their mindset. Strength is contagious. When you are around people who take responsibility for their lives, push through hardship, and refuse to make excuses, you begin to hold yourself to a higher standard. You see what is possible. You witness resilience in action. You learn that struggles are not dead ends, but stepping stones to growth. This kind of environment fosters an attitude of perseverance, and that is exactly what is needed when you are going through difficult times. One of the biggest mistakes people make is holding on to relationships that weaken them. Sometimes the people closest to you are the very ones who discourage you from improving. They may do this out of their own fears, insecurities, or lack of ambition, but their influence can be damaging regardless of their intentions. If someone is constantly feeding you doubt, negativity, or complacency, you must ask yourself whether keeping them in your life is worth the cost. This is not about cutting people off for the sake of it. It is about recognizing whether the people around you are helping you grow or keeping you stuck. Relationships should challenge you, push you to be better, and provide strength when you are struggling. If they do the opposite, they are not serving you. Seeking out strong people does not mean you must find perfect individuals who have everything figured out. No one is without struggle, and no one is free from moments of doubt. But the key difference is in how they handle difficulty. Do they face it with determination, or do they surrender to it? Do they push forward despite hardship, or do they look for ways to avoid responsibility? The answers to these questions determine whether someone is a source of strength or a source of weakness. Surround yourself with those who embody resilience, who take action despite fear, and who refuse to be defined by their struggles. These are the people who will reinforce your ability to get through your own challenges. Strength does not just come from within. It is also built through connection. When you are struggling, having the right people in your corner can make all the difference. A strong support system does not mean people who simply comfort you and tell you what you want to hear. True support comes from those who push you to keep going when you feel like giving up, who hold you accountable when you start making excuses, and who remind you of your own strength when you forget it. The right people will not let you fall into self-pity. They will not allow you to stay stuck in your struggles. They will challenge you, inspire you, and remind you that you are capable of more than you think. If you want to be strong, seek out strength. If you want to persevere, surround yourself with those who refuse to quit. If you want to rise above your struggles, place yourself in an environment that reinforces growth rather than weakness. The people around you should serve as a source of motivation, not a source of limitation. The company you keep matters more than you realize, and choosing it wisely can be the difference between staying stuck and pushing through to something greater. Hope is not just a feeling, it is a discipline. It is something that must be actively cultivated, especially in the darkest moments when it seems like there is no reason to believe that things will get better. People often think of hope as something passive, as if it is just an emotion that comes and goes depending on circumstances. But real hope is not dependent on circumstances. It is a mindset, a choice, a refusal to give in to despair, even when everything seems to be falling apart. It is the belief that no matter how difficult things are, there is a way forward, even if you cannot yet see it. The problem is that when people go through deep hardship, they often lose sight of this. Pain narrows vision. It makes it difficult to imagine a future that is different from the suffering of the present. The mind becomes trapped in a cycle of negativity, where every thought reinforces the idea that things will never improve. This is one of the most dangerous places to be, because when you stop believing in the possibility of change, you stop taking the steps necessary to create it. The moment you accept that things will never get better, you guarantee that they won't. But hope is not about pretending that everything is fine when it isn't. It is not about ignoring reality or dismissing the seriousness of struggles. Instead, hope is the recognition that even in the most difficult situations, there is always something that can be done. There is always an action that can be taken, a lesson that can be learned, a step that can be made toward a better future. And that small belief, that sliver of possibility, is often what makes the difference between people who get through hardship and people who are broken by it. People who cultivate hope understand that struggle is temporary, even when it feels endless. They do not allow themselves to become defined by their suffering. They acknowledge their pain, but they refuse to let it dictate the rest of their lives. They understand that no matter how difficult things are, time moves forward, and with it comes change. That change may not happen overnight. It may take weeks, months, or even years. But as long as you keep going, as long as you refuse to surrender to despair, things can and do shift. And what seems unbearable today may not seem so overwhelming a year from now. What feels like the end of everything may, in hindsight, be the beginning of something new. One of the greatest sources of hope is progress, no matter how small. When people feel hopeless, it is often because they feel stuck. They believe that their actions do not matter, that nothing they do will change their situation. But this is rarely true. Even the smallest step forward can reignite a sense of possibility. When you take action, even in a small way, you prove to yourself that movement is possible. That proof in turn fuels hope, and hope fuels further action. It is a cycle, one that leads you out of despair and into something better. There will always be moments when hope feels distant. In those moments, it is necessary to remind yourself of past struggles you have already overcome. You have faced difficulties before and you have made it through them. You have endured pain, uncertainty, and failure, yet you are still here. That alone is proof that you are capable of withstanding hardship. Often people forget their own resilience. They focus only on their current struggles, failing to recognize the strength they have already demonstrated throughout their lives. But if you look back and see how far you have come, you will find reasons to believe that you can keep going. Hope is also reinforced by perspective. When people are overwhelmed by their problems, they tend to see only what is wrong. But no matter how difficult a situation is, there is always something to be grateful for. There is always something, no matter how small, that serves as a reminder that life is not purely suffering. It could be the presence of a friend, a moment of peace, or even just the fact that you are alive and capable of change. Gratitude does not erase struggle, but it provides balance. It reminds you that hardship is not the only reality. It is just a part of a larger picture. And within that larger picture, there is room for things to get better. At its core, hope is about refusing to let struggle define the rest of your life. It is about recognizing that no situation is permanent, that even the darkest nights are followed by morning. It is not a vague optimism that ignores hardship, but a deep, unshakable belief that you have the power to endure, to adapt, and to build something better, no matter what you are facing now.